The morning arrived dressed in deceptive gentility, sunlight filtering through pale clouds like lace drawn across the face of the sky. Along the sweeping lawns of Hawthorne Court, white marquees fluttered softly while servants hurried between tables laid with silver, crystal, and sugared fruits. Ladies in pastel gowns drifted like perfumed petals across the grass, their laughter light, their curiosity lighter still. A string quartet played beneath an elm, notes floating politely above the murmur of rank, reputation, and restrained delight. It was a day arranged for charity, for display, and for the comfortable reassurance that the world remained exactly as society preferred it. No one anticipated disruption. No one expected the past to walk calmly up the gravel drive. The first whisper began near the lemonade table, where a dowager lowered her lorgnette and inhaled sharply. Heads turned with delicate discretion. Conversations faltered, then reassembled themselves into softer, sharper shapes. For there, approaching without haste, walked a woman memory had not released, though etiquette had pretended to. Her gown was modest dove gray, unadorned except for careful stitching at the cuffs. A straw bonnet framed features once admired, once discussed, once banished from polite mention. Her posture was upright, neither apologetic nor defiant. At either side of her walked two small children, identical in height, coloring, and solemn curiosity. Their golden hair caught the light like threads of spun sunlight, their hands resting trustingly within hers. They gazed upon the spectacle with wonder, unaware they were already its center. A hush rippled outward as recognition settled like dust upon old furniture. She had returned. After years of absence, she had returned. Her name passed from lip to lip without sound, carried instead by glances, lifted brows, and meaningful pauses. Some remembered her beauty. Others remembered the scandal of her departure. All remembered the man she had left behind. He stood near the rose arbor, speaking with composed civility to a magistrate's wife, his dark coat impeccable, his expression practiced into agreeable neutrality. Time had refined him, not softened him. Respect followed him easily like a well-trained hound. He noticed the silence before he noticed its cause. His gaze lifted, traveled idly, then halted with sudden stillness. He saw the children first. Something in their coloring, their bearing, their quiet watchfulness struck him with inexplicable force. Then his eyes moved upward, and the years between them collapsed without mercy. She stood across the lawn, unchanged in the ways memory preserves, altered in the ways sorrow instructs. Their gazes met and the world narrowed to breath. Around them, conversation resumed with heightened interest. Fans fluttered. Gentlemen pretended sudden fascination with horticulture. Speculation bloomed shamelessly. The children shifted closer to their mother, sensing attention without understanding it. She inclined her head slightly, an acknowledgment devoid of warmth, yet not discourteous. He did not bow. He could not seem to remember how. A lady nearby whispered behind her glove. Another murmured the word resemblance. The suggestion moved swiftly, invisibly, dangerously. He heard nothing, yet understood everything. The line of the boy's jaw. The contemplative stillness in the girl's eyes. Recognition did not arrive as certainty, but as a tightening in his chest that refused dismissal. She spoke softly to the children, guiding them toward the refreshment tables with measured calm. Each step she took seemed observed, weighed, and recorded by invisible scribes of society. Yet her composure did not fracture. If shame accompanied her, it had been mastered long ago. If pain lingered, it walked beside her like an old acquaintance. He excused himself without awareness of what he said. His feet carried him forward several paces before pride halted them. He remained where he stood, suspended between approach and retreat. Years of careful rebuilding trembled beneath the weight of a single sight. He had taught himself indifference. It deserted him completely. One of the twins noticed him watching. The child tilted his head with frank curiosity, unburdened by history. He whispered something to his sister, who followed his gaze without hesitation. Their identical expressions regarded the gentleman across the lawn as though he were part of the entertainment. She felt it before she saw it, the invisible thread tightening between past and present. Slowly she turned. Their eyes met again, closer now in awareness if not in distance. The music seemed to fade beneath the pounding of unspoken recollection. Neither smiled. Neither looked away. The children glanced between them, puzzled by a tension too quiet for understanding. The girl tugged gently at her mother's glove. In a voice clear enough to travel farther than intended, she asked, "Mama, who is that gentleman staring at us?" The words fell into the hush like a pebble into still water, sending ripples through every watching heart. Color drained from his face. Breath deserted hers. And society, having hungered for spectacle, found itself abruptly confronted with truth it could neither name nor ignore. No one laughed. No one pretended not to hear. The quartet faltered, bows hesitating against strings. A breeze wandered across the lawn, lifting ribbons, stirring hems, carrying the question farther than gossip had yet traveled. He took a step forward before sense reclaimed him. She lowered her gaze, not in submission but in weary anticipation. The children waited, patient for an answer that suddenly mattered more than anything the day had promised. His hand twitched at his side, as though reaching for a memory he had long forbidden himself to touch. Her lips parted, then closed again, composure wrestling with honesty. Around them, expectation thickened the air into something almost visible. The past stood between them, no longer distant, no longer silent, but breathing with undeniable presence. The boy shifted closer to his sister, their shoulders touching in unconscious solidarity. Sunlight slipped from behind a cloud, illuminating their hair with startling brilliance. He saw himself there, reflected in miniature, undeniable and terrifying. She saw his realization dawn, slow and irreversible. Neither spoke, yet everything essential had already been revealed between them. Conversation did not resume after the child's question. It rearranged itself into sharper curiosity. Guests pretended distraction while observing with unapologetic attention. Servants slowed their steps. Even the breeze seemed to linger, as though unwilling to disturb what hung between the woman, the gentleman, and the golden-headed proof of time's quiet passage. She answered her daughter gently, too softly for others to hear, yet the calm in her voice suggested long practice in disguising difficult truths. The children accepted her reply with obedient trust, though their eyes continued wandering toward him with candid fascination that quietly unsettled every nearby observer. He remained where he stood, dignity warring with urgency beneath his composed exterior. The magistrate's wife spoke to him still, unaware her words dissolved into meaningless sound. His attention belonged entirely to the small family across the lawn. At last, with restrained deliberation, he summoned a passing servant and murmured instructions without removing his gaze from them. The servant bowed and departed toward the refreshment tables, carrying an order that appeared harmless, charitable, perfectly proper, and yet destined to ignite speculation among already attentive witnesses who watched every motion with sharpened interest and barely concealed anticipation for unfolding scandal nearby. Moments later, a tray appeared before the twins, adorned with sugared cakes, ripe berries, and chilled lemonade beating with condensation. The servant delivered it with respectful courtesy, announcing it as a gift from a gentleman across the lawn. The children brightened with immediate delight, their gratitude innocent and unguarded. She stiffened almost imperceptibly, recognizing the gesture for what it was: careful, visible, impossible to misinterpret. Around them, murmurs rose like startled birds. Kindness in this setting was not simple. Kindness carried meaning, and meaning carried danger. She leaned down to the children, whispering instructions about gratitude and restraint, though her eyes never lifted toward him again. Her composure held, but a faint color touched her cheeks, betraying emotion she would rather conceal. The boy selected a sugared cake and smiled toward the distant figure who had provided it. That small, unthinking smile pierced him more sharply than any accusation could have managed. It was gratitude offered without knowledge, acceptance without history, and it stirred something fierce and protective within him. Society observed the exchange with greedy fascination. Ladies tilted their heads together beneath fluttering fans. Gentlemen pretended to discuss the weather while tracking every glance. The narrative began assembling itself in whispers. A woman returned, children unexplained, and a gentleman whose interest was impossible to deny. Speculation required little evidence when imagination was eager. The air thickened with conclusions drawn too quickly and yet dangerously close to truth. She decided to leave before the curiosity sharpened further into cruelty. Gathering the children with gentle efficiency, she guided them toward the gravel path where hired carriages waited. Her steps were steady, but haste hid beneath them. The sky, which had been politely bright all morning, shifted without warning. Clouds gathered like witnesses unwilling to remain silent. A cool wind swept across the lawns, tugging at ribbons and hems as though urging events forward. The first drops of rain fell just as she reached the drive. Guests scattered toward shelter with startled laughter, abandoning decorum for dryness. Carriages became suddenly precious, their drivers scrambling to accommodate panicked nobility. She paused beneath a tree, shielding the twins with her shawl while calculating her next move. The children watched the rain with delight, unaware of inconvenience or tension. She, however, understood delay meant prolonged exposure to watching eyes. Through the curtain of rain he approached at last. His stride was purposeful, coat darkening with moisture, expression set with quiet resolve. He removed his hat as he reached her, a gesture of courtesy that felt far more intimate than politeness required. For a moment they stood beneath the dripping branches, the children between them, the world blurred by falling water and rising memory. "My carriage is at your disposal," he said evenly, voice low enough to remain private despite the open space. "It will convey you wherever you wish to go, with comfort and haste." She met his gaze only briefly before lowering her eyes. "Your generosity is noted, sir," she replied with careful restraint, "but unnecessary. We shall manage." The formality between them felt like a wall hastily rebuilt from old ruins. One of the twins shifted impatiently and dropped a small object into the wet grass. He bent instinctively to retrieve it before she could stop him. In his hand rested a tiny wooden horse, smoothed by use, carved with unmistakable familiarity. His breath caught. The shape, the detailing, the style were identical to toys he had once crafted during long winter evenings years ago. He turned it over slowly, rain dripping from its edges like punctuation. She saw recognition strike him and closed her eyes briefly, as though bracing against an inevitable storm far greater than the one overhead. The children watched with curiosity as he handed the toy back to the boy, fingers lingering for a fraction too long. When he straightened, something unspoken had shifted irreversibly between them. The rain softened into a steady curtain, muting the world beyond their fragile circle. That if you like my content, don't forget to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments. As she gathered the children to step away, he spoke quietly, words meant only for her. "Madam," he said, voice unsteady despite his effort, "you have taken more with you than you ever knew." She paused, her hand tightening around her daughter's glove. For the first time since arriving, her composure faltered visibly. She did not turn back, yet the weight of his words held her motionless beneath the rain, suspended between departure and confession. Rain insisted upon proximity where pride preferred distance. By the time servants guided them indoors, the storm had turned the lawns to silver blur and the corridors to hushed refuge. He led without touching, she followed without yielding, and the twins, damp and curious, regarded the great house with solemn wonder. A governess was summoned with efficient discretion and received the children kindly, promising warm towels and sugared milk beside a small fire. Their reluctance to leave their mother lasted only a moment, soothed by gentleness and novelty. When the door closed upon their soft voices, silence gathered like breath held too long. He chose the library because it was nearest and because it remembered him. Tall shelves rose in dark ranks, leather spines exhaling a faint, papery perfume. Firelight licked the grate, gilding the carpet with patient warmth while rain tapped at the windows in persistent code. She removed her gloves with deliberate care, laying them on a side table as though order might be restored by neatness alone. He set his hat aside and remained standing, unsure whether courtesy required distance or truth demanded nearness. Years pressed into the space between them, dense as the air before thunder. "Pray be seated," he said at last, the phrase formal enough to hide the tremor beneath it. She obeyed, choosing the chair opposite his, posture upright, gaze lowered to the hearth. He did not sit. He walked to the mantel, then back again, a restless orbit around the question that had followed them inside. The fire snapped softly, punctuating the quiet with small, impatient sounds. He studied her profile as if it were a page he had once known by heart and now struggled to read. "You left without farewell," he began, voice controlled by will rather than calm. "You left without explanation, and I—" He stopped, swallowing the remainder as though it were bitter medicine. She lifted her eyes then, meeting his with a steadiness that was neither defensive nor pleading. "I left," she answered, "because staying would have ruined you." The simplicity of the statement startled him more than any elaborate excuse could have managed. He waited and she continued. Words came measured, each one placed with care, as though the past were fragile glass. Letters had arrived bearing accusations crafted to wound his name. Witnesses had been promised, reputations threatened, and a choice presented that was not a choice at all. If she remained, scandal would attach to him like a burr to fine cloth. If she departed, the story could be shaped into something survivable. "They required a sacrifice," she said quietly. "I offered myself before they could demand you." He felt the room tilt, not with dizziness but with rearranged understanding. Pride, long fed by the belief that he had been abandoned, found itself starving in the presence of her account. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked, the question escaping as accusation before softening into grief. She smiled without mirth. Because you would have fought for me and they counted upon that. Your defense would have confirmed their invention. Your anger would have been paraded as proof. The fire settled into a steady glow as comprehension gathered its reluctant shape. He pictured the years he had spent rebuilding a life from splintered affection, never suspecting the foundation had been protected by her exile. You bore disgrace for my sake, he said, the words sounding foreign in his own mouth. She shook her head gently. I bore silence, she corrected. Disgrace belongs to those who manufacture it. A clock on the shelf ticked with officious patience, measuring the distance between revelation and acceptance. He finally took the chair beside hers, closer than propriety advised, farther than longing preferred. And the children? He asked, the phrase fragile as glass. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with resolute clarity. They are yours, she said, without adornment, without appeal. I discovered it after I had gone too far to return without destroying what I sought to preserve. He did not speak. Breath entered him as though newly invented. Images assembled themselves with merciless speed. Golden hair in sunlight, a wooden horse in a small hand, a question asked upon a lawn before witnesses. Fatherhood did not arrive as joy or fear, but as recognition so profound it seemed older than memory. He pressed his palm to his brow, steadying himself against the magnitude of what had always been true. I counted months in solitude, she continued, voice gentler now. I counted heartbeats that belonged to you though you did not know they existed. I told them stories of a gentleman who valued honor above comfort, kindness above vanity. I never spoke your name, yet they have grown beneath its shadow. Her composure wavered, then recovered with quiet bravery. A soft knock interrupted them. The door opened a careful inch, and the boy's small face appeared, flushed with warmth and drowsiness. Mama, he murmured, rubbing his eyes, I had a dream about the man with my eyes. The innocence of the statement passed through the room like a bell's clear note. She rose at once, gathering him into her arms, murmuring reassurances that trembled at their edges. He remained seated, watching the child with an expression stripped of every practiced defense. The girl appeared behind her brother, peering curiously into the lamplit space. Their gazes found him without hesitation, unafraid, expectant in a way they did not yet understand. In that gentle, unbearable moment, the past ceased to be accusation and became inheritance. He understood that whatever he had rebuilt would now be measured against what he had unknowingly lost. Morning entered the estate with a hesitant radiance, as though uncertain whether it ought to illuminate what the night had confessed. Mist hovered low across the gardens, clinging to hedges and marble urns with delicate reluctance. Servants moved quietly along gravel paths, restoring order to a world that had shifted in meaning while they slept. Within the breakfast room, voices resumed their measured politeness, yet every glance betrayed the same restless curiosity. News had traveled faster than the dawn. By the time guests took their tea, speculation had matured into expectation. She descended the staircase with the twins at her sides, each child dressed neatly in borrowed garments offered by discreet hands. Her composure had returned, but it bore the fine tension of glass drawn too thin. The children regarded the grand interior with solemn admiration, whispering questions she answered softly. When they entered the morning room, conversations faltered in identical rhythm. Fans paused mid-flutter. Teacups hovered above saucers. Eyes, carefully trained to conceal judgment, failed magnificently in their effort. He rose at once from where he stood near the window. There was no hesitation in the gesture, no consideration of who watched. He crossed the room with steady purpose and stopped beside her, not in greeting but in alignment. The act was subtle yet unmistakable. He did not offer his arm. He did not bow. He simply stood beside her as though the space belonged to them both. The silence that followed carried more weight than any announcement. A gentleman near the hearth cleared his throat delicately. An unexpected reunion it would seem, he remarked with feigned lightness that convinced no one. The words drifted toward them with pointed implication. She felt the sting, though her expression did not betray it. Before she could reply, he spoke, voice cool and precise. Not unexpected, he said evenly. Merely long delayed. The remark settled like frost across warm skin. No one pursued the matter further. The twins shifted closer to their mother, sensing the undercurrent without understanding its source. He lowered himself to one knee with natural grace, bringing his height to theirs. Good morning, he said gently, meeting their eyes with unguarded warmth. May I know your names? The children answered shyly, their voices small yet clear. He repeated each name as though committing it to memory, which in truth he was. A murmur traveled through the room, quiet but electric. She watched him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "You need not do this," she whispered under the veil of surrounding conversation. "You owe us nothing that requires spectacle." He rose slowly, turning toward her with a calm that belied the intensity beneath it. "I owe them everything that requires honesty," he replied. "And I owe you a life no longer edited for the comfort of cowards." The statement did not go unheard. A lady near the window gasped softly before disguising it as a cough. Whispers gathered again, but they had changed in character. Curiosity had become apprehension. Something was unfolding that society could not easily categorize or contain. She felt the weight of it pressing upon her, threatening the fragile peace she had fought to preserve for years. A servant approached to announce that the carriages were prepared for a morning promenade through the gardens. Guests welcomed the diversion eagerly, rising with relief from chairs that had begun to feel like witness stands. He turned to her without ceremony. "Walk with me," he said quietly. It was not a request, but neither was it a command. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. They stepped onto the Duchess path, the twins between them. Other guests followed at a respectful distance, their interest poorly disguised as admiration for the roses. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming petals. Birds tested the morning with cautious song. He walked close enough that the sleeve of his coat brushed hers with each measured stride. The contact, accidental in appearance, felt deliberate in meaning. A familiar voice drifted from behind them, smooth with insinuation. "You are brave, sir, to invite speculation so freely." He did not turn. "Speculation," he replied calmly, "is the occupation of those who lack facts." The speaker fell silent, unable to compete with the quiet authority of his tone. She felt a tremor pass through her, not of fear, but of something dangerously close to hope. They paused beside a marble bench overlooking the lily pond. The twins leaned over the edge to watch dragonflies skim the water. For a moment, the world narrowed to this small circle of reflected sky and whispered breaths. She spoke without looking at him. "You risk much by standing beside me." He answered without hesitation. "I risked more by standing apart." The simplicity of the words struck her more forcefully than any declaration could have. She turned toward him, searching his expression for doubt, for hesitation, for the careful calculation she remembered from years past. She found none. What she saw instead was a steadiness forged by loss and sharpened by revelation. Footsteps approached again, interrupting the fragile stillness. A group of guests gathered at a polite distance, pretending interest in the pond while listening shamelessly. He straightened, awareness returning to the broader stage upon which they stood. "There will be a banquet this evening," he said quietly to her. "You and the children will attend as my honored guests." Her breath caught. "That would invite—" She could not finish the sentence. "Let it," he said gently. "I am finished allowing silence to govern my life." The twins turned toward them, sensing the change in tone. The girl slipped her small hand into his without hesitation, as though the gesture had been waiting years to occur. He looked down at her with an expression that undid her resolve entirely. Across the garden, whispers rose again, louder now, threaded with disbelief. They had ceased pretending discretion. The spectacle had become undeniable. Yet he remained where he stood, her child's hand resting trustingly in his own, his posture calm, unyielding, and profoundly clear in its meaning. She realized then that the morning had accomplished what the night had only begun. What had once been hidden in private grief was stepping boldly into public truth. And as the guests watched with widening eyes, he did not release the child's hand, nor did he move away from her side, allowing society to understand without words that by evening, everything would be different.